I'm Lisa DeMarco, and on Tuesday, May 23rd, I'll be moderating DASA, Navigating the Dignity for All Students Act. I'm joined today by Christopher Shishko, partner at Guercio Guercio, to discuss the upcoming event.
Hi, Lisa. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Can you explain DASA?
Sure. So DASA is the acronym for the Dignity for All Students Act. The Dignity Act was signed into law September 13th of 2020. It became effective July 1 of 2012. It added a section to the New York State education law that applies to educational institutions across the state. In the simplest terms, it requires school districts across New York State to prevent, monitor, and address bullying by providing staff training, designating anti-bullying coordinators, generally referred to as DASA coordinators, provide sensitivity and tolerance curriculum for students, increased transparency requirements for school districts to report incidents of bullying to the New York State Education Department, and required that school districts implement changes to codes of conduct and policies to address bullying and harassment in schools, and provide for procedures for investigating and responding to complaints of bullying in schools across the state.
Thank you. And who does DASA apply to?
The DASA applies to all public schools in New York State. Every public school, all of the BOCES, they are all governed by the Dignity for All Students Act. They all have the same requirements for reporting to the state and the obligation to investigate and address complaints of bullying and harassment in the schools.
Why is it so important to keep accurate records?
So it's a really great question, and there's a practical and a legal answer to that. And the legal answer, that's the one I always start with, is there's a liability concern. When New York State passed this law, it was a requirement for schools to follow. They must do these things. And if there's a lawsuit or if there's a challenge to something, and it relates to bullying or harassment in the schools, not following the law and not following your policy can lead to liability for a school district. So it's absolutely critical that the schools not just comply with the law, but comply with the obligation to document that they properly complied with their policies and also the reporting to the state in order to avoid liability. And then the very practical aspect of it is the purpose of DASA was to increase the transparency both publicly to the state and within the schools, so that that data can be looked at, explored, and aggregated over time to see is bullying increasing, is it decreasing, what's working and what's not. So there's there's the usefulness of the data, which makes it important that there be integrity to it, but it's also a legal requirement that it be maintained and available in the event of litigation.
Chris, who is ultimately responsible for ensuring the accurate reporting of the DASA complaint?
So the ultimate responsibility is the school district. That means it's really the Board of Education. So the Board of Education has a policy that starts at the building level. So at that level, it's the assistant principal or the principal. And then at the district level, it's the superintendent. But regardless, it's always the responsibility of the Board of Education, because the appeals go to the board, and then the Commissioner of Education has oversight from that level. So when there's a challenge, it goes to the State Education Department, and then the Board of Education is the one that has to respond to that challenge and explain whether what was done was proper or not. And we represent school districts in those types of appeals. So it is important for us to work with our clients to say, you are ultimately responsible to do this properly. And if there is a legal challenge to whether you did it or not, the state will hold you accountable if you don't follow your own policies and procedures, which are required by law. This was intended to change the culture of schools. And that is not something that happens overnight, but it's very important that anyone who's involved with this, with the administration of schools, understand that it's not optional. And it's not something that's just an aspirational goal. It's a legal requirement. And that means that, sometimes it may be difficult to implement something, or it may be difficult to address behaviors in a way that's different than what people have been used to. it's absolutely critical to implement this law as written and with fidelity, and with knowing that the intention of the state legislature was to say, we intend to eliminate an environment of bullying and harassment, and this is the roadmap for doing it. So it's not just something that the coalition of yours aspires to. It has to happen. It's a legal requirement.
Chris, your fellow panelists include Joe Salamoni, Executive Director of the Long Island Coalition Against Bullying, Matthew Palmara, Co-founder and Vice President of ARC Technology Consultants, Dr. Mark Secor, Superintendent of Schools of Smithtown Central School District, and Robert Vecchio, Executive Director of the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association. Who should attend this event?
That's a great question, because DASA applies to anyone who has any student in any school district. So really, everyone in the educational system it's relevant to. But really, the ones who are the most involved are those who have to participate in the investigation process. The process begins at the building level and it goes to the district level, and then in many instances it's at the Board of Education level. So for everyone involved at the building level, so the school psychologists, the DASA coordinators, the maybe assistant principals and principals, directors sometimes are involved in that process, and then at the district level, oftentimes it's an assistant superintendent, or even the superintendent that would hear the first level of appeal. And I think it's something that board members, from the boards of education, should be interested in and would benefit from, because not only are they the policy making body of the school district, so they're the ones that implement these policies, but in many instances they are the final level of appeal at the school district level. So they may be directly involved at some point in the process with deciding an appeal. And I think it's very helpful if they're informed on what the law is and what is required, so that when they're deciding on those appeals, they can make it in an informed manner.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you and all of these districts on May 23rd at Long Island Cares for the DASA Dignity for All Students Act Breakfast and Educational Panel.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing everyone on the 23rd. I look forward to seeing a lot of the stakeholders, board members, assistant superintendents, superintendents, and others who are involved in this very important process. Thank you for inviting me.